Behind me is my 1991 Volkswagen Golf Mark II. It's got no engine, it's got no interior, it's really got nothing about it. Now, in the last video, you saw Monkey in the Barn and we pulled apart the 3.5 Golf convertible. So the Mark III Golf with a funny front end on it. That came apart, we've done that, and there are a couple of little bits and pieces left to remove from that. So we had to take out the wiring loom, and with that out, there's not much left on that car. So here's the car. If you're not familiar with it, it's a 1991 Mark II Golf that I'm trying to build on an absolute budget. So if you're interested in building a Mark II Golf on a budget, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this with your friends. And we can all go on this journey together. So what have we got? We've got to get the fuel tank out of the 3.5. So we've got it here behind me. So we need the fuel tank out and the fuel lines, and I think that's probably it. So it means I'm gonna have to get under the back of the car and strip the tank out. And then I think we're done. And we can get cracking on the Mark II. Now, we have been busy while we've been away. It took a little while to do it, but we've created the new loom for this car because it's not quite a lift and shift for. It's a CE2 fuse box, but there's some pins that need to be repinned, and we needed to strip out things like the Mark III headlight loom and splice in the Mark II headlight loom, and basically a couple of other bits and pieces like putting in a wire for the rev counter. So there are some bits that really aren't that interesting. So I wouldn't want it to have bored you with 5 minutes, 10 minutes of stripping down a wiring loom and taping it back together. But with that said, let's get on to taking the fuel tank out of this car. We're starting in the boot by taking this metal plate off, and then under here we've got the fuel lines and we've got the electrical connector for the pump. Right, so underneath this car, it is disgusting. And this is probably the worst job out of all of them, just because as soon as I put this impact gun on to take the bolts out, it's going to, it's just going to shower me in all the crap off the bottom of the car. So it's a necessary evil. You've got 3 at the back, or 3 at the front and 2 at the back. And I'm very aware this is not the most flattering angle for me. So let's have a look and see what we've got to do. Oh, that's unpleasant. Let's give it a bang first. Was falling down on my head. Yeah. So we undid the bolt at the top of the filler neck, so it's just dropping down. And that's it. With a little pull, the tank comes out. It's time to turn our attention to the Mark II. Now, putting the new loom back into the car. We're trying to keep it as factory looking as possible. So what I've done is I've loomed it up using canvas loom tape, and we're going to pop the Mark II Golf cable clips back open because these are reusable. And we're going to just put the wiring, run it all the way around. Now this is the factory loom. This is the new loom up here. So we've got the ECU plug, we've got a temperature sensor and some other bits and pieces. We've got the fan controllers. We're using the Mark III fan controllers. So we're gonna have to make a bracket up to mount them onto the inside of the strut. It's no big deal. We can reuse the Mark III one. So with the loom in, we need to get the brake servo back in, and then we're kind of ready to turn our attentions to the engine. One of the reasons this took a little longer than we initially thought, we're gonna put aircon in here. So this donor car came with air conditioning. So while we're here and everything's apart, it seemed like the right time to install air conditioning into this Mark II Golf. Down here, we've got an air box from a Mark II Golf that has air conditioning. Now, the main things you can see are you've got this unit here where the pipes connect, and we've got the drain hole at the bottom, which I guess all the condensation runs out of. Size-wise, it's pretty similar to the Mark III box. So with a little bit of modification, we'll hopefully be able to get the Mark III box into the Mark II. We've made a template using the bulkhead of a scrap Mark II Golf, and we're now offering it up to the Mark III airbox to see how it fits. So it's close, but not perfect. Although the boxes look the same, there's some differences. So you can see we've got one of the mount poles there. The heater matrix comes through here, and then we've got the others. So you can see that's there. Now with the airbox offered up against the Mark II bulkhead, we can see around the top, you've got that indent in the foam where the heater matrix comes through. So we know we can line that up with the hole in the Mark II Golf bulkhead. And then everything else needs to go from there. So there's a couple of holes that are going to need slotting, and there's 1 or 2 holes that we're going to have to re-drill, and quite a large hole we're going to need to drill in this bulkhead for the air conditioning drain, because it's a little plastic pipe, but it comes with a huge big fat grommet, so we're going to need to drill that out as well. With all that done, it's time to bolt the airbox to the bulkhead just to make sure everything fits nicely, and then we're ready to transfer this to the bulkhead of the car. There we go, yeah. Okay, now we bite the bullet. There's no going back now. It's time to drill the holes in our Budget Mark II, and fingers crossed, it all lines up afterwards and we can get the airbox in. Now, this may not be the prettiest job, and there are some things I might do differently next time. I might take a little bit more time cutting out the holes, but look, as a proof of concept, as a kind of first attempt, I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. Now, we've treated the holes, so they're all good. Bit of etch primer, then a bit of paint over the top. It's not quite the same color. Not that worried, because this is all going to be covered by a heat shield anyway. So no one's ever going to see this. And the sort of hole here that we have got for the pipes to come through, again, could have made it a little bit neater. It's going to be covered by a metal bracket anyway. So as long as it seals, which it does, then I'm quite happy with it. No one's ever going to see that. And to be honest, the benefits are going to far outweigh the me knowing that maybe there's a bit of a wonky cut under there. So actually, all things considered, it's a pretty decent job. Now, the next thing we need to overcome is the heater box is a slightly different shape to the Mark II one. Again, they look very similar, and on the surface, it doesn't look like there's much of a difference. But when we look down here, you can see this hole here. When we put the heater box in, it doesn't quite line up. The fan inlet sits a little bit further back on the Mark III. So while I was off cooking up some steaks, Sam made a custom sort of intake for this using some bits off the Mark II heater box and a spare piece of ABS plastic. And that's basically created this top piece, which is going to help seal it up. So taking a look at it, we've got it down here, and you can see once it's in the car, this is kind of pushed flat. So we're going to secure this anyway, because we've got this gap here that we need to close. So obviously this is butted up against the bottom of the dash anyway, but we're going to put a nice plastic panel over here that's all going to be bolted down or screwed into the top here. So that's going to be nice and sealed. You've got this top hat here, if you will, which is cut off a spare Mark II airbox. And then you can see here that we've got this plastic flap that we've put in as well. So what that means is that should fit nice and tightly. And once we've filled this hole, screwed this all down together, it should look half decent and actually be functional. So again, one of these weird little things you wouldn't think you'd have to do, but it is a slightly different shape. So yeah, look, we can tick that off the list, get that done, get it bolted into the car, and then we can get back on to doing some of the mechanical stuff. Right, turning my attention to the engine and the subframe. Now, the Mark III subframe does bolt straight into the Mark II, so that is an option, but this one is particularly crusty. And if we take a look down here, yeah, we can see that it's, well, I mean, it's functional. It's a bit oily. I guess that's corrosion protection. But yeah, you can see everything is just that bit crusty. So I think we're going to renew a couple of bits and pieces here. Now, as I say, we're doing this on a budget, and normally I would just reuse what we've got. I'd give it a lick of black paint and we'd be good to go. But as luck would have it, I've already got another Mark II Golf subframe that I've already given a lick of black paint to, and I've painted the lower arms. And so it's all kind of nice and shiny-ish, ready to go on this car. So we're going to use those. So it means I'm going to take the power steering rack off of here and then transfer this and the hubs over to the new subframe. And that's going to mean we're going to replace the lower arms, the anti-roll bar, the ball joints. We're also going to do the track rod ends as well, because it's all just a bit crusty. So now I guess we're going to start to spend some money with some service parts that are clearly in need of changing. Or maybe not. I've just put these two subframes side by side, and there is one difference that I hadn't counted on, and that's the rear engine mount. Looking down here, we can see this is the Mark III rack. So we've got the gearbox mount here, which is the same as a Mark II. But then we come across to the driver's side rear engine mount, and that is different. And the way it mounts as well is completely different. So on the back of the block, you've still got the sort of army thing sticking out, but then it goes onto this mount here, which is completely different. Whereas the Mark II has this type of affair. So you can see that it kind of, this holds the rubber mount, and then obviously that has the plate on top that bolts onto the bottom of that. So this mounts with a couple of bolts here. This is like a flat, sort of the same as this really. So it means I'm gonna have to rethink my plan, and I'm gonna have to strip down the old subframe and replace the arms and the anti-roll bar and the ball joints and everything on the original subframe. So it means I don't need to touch the power steering rack. I just need to take the track rod ends off and then take the hubs off with the arms, give them all a bit of a clean, and then put the new arms or the replacement arms and everything else back on the original subframe. So that's definitely something I hadn't thought about. With the subframe built back up, it's now time to turn our attention to the Mark II. So first things first, we've got to take the tank and the lines out of this to make way for the Mark III tank and lines. You can see just under here, same as the Mark III, there's a 10mm bolt holding the filler neck in place. That came out a lot easier than I thought it would. So that's the 10 out. Now we've just got to undo the 213, holding the rear tank straps down, and that's this tank out. Just like that, they're done. It's finally time to start putting bits into this Mark II now. So I'm going to start with the fuel lines and the fuel tank. So back under the car for another time, and let's get on with it. So we've got the fuel lines down here for the Mark III. Obviously they're going into the Mark II. So we've got these two, and there's the third one, which is this black one here with the fuel filter on. I'm going to run this in now, but I'm not going to secure it to the bottom of the car until I change that fuel filter. Totally forgot about it, so I'll get that ordered today and get the fuel filter replaced in the next couple of days. All right, so underneath the car, we've got the cutout here in the chassis leg where the fuel lines feed through. And obviously we've got the clips on the tank. So if you run your hand up the inside, you can feel it just here. We do it one at a time, and then with the 3 lines in, there's a foam insert to put in that stops them rubbing together, I believe. And then that's the lines in, nice and simple. We've got 3 fuel lines running through the chassis leg into the engine bay. Now we're sat under the car, just clipping the lines in place. Turns out the clips on the bottom of the Mark II aren't in the best of condition. So luckily we salvaged the clips off of the Mark III. Now it turns out that it's a struggle getting the Mark III fuel lines into the Mark II sort of clips. It's because they're actually different sizes, which you wouldn't know unless you look at them side by side, but it makes perfect sense. So you can see here, we've got the Mark III one at the bottom, which has got sort of 3 large diameter recesses to put the pipes through. Whereas the Mark II has only got these 2, one either side. So because the Mark III has those 3 lines, obviously you need 3 holes. So there we go. The more you know. All right, with the lines in, it's time to get the engine bay ready to receive the new motor. But before we do that, we're going to take out the old subframe. So we're going to take the wheels off, disconnect the brakes, and then undo the subframe bolts and drop it down. And as I missed out on so much track time at the national meet last year because my gear linkage just decided to shit the bed, I'm going to do some preventative maintenance and rebuild this linkage now before we put it back in the car. As you can see, it's in a bit of a bad way. There should be a ball on here. Yeah, it's all kind of pretty crusty and worn. So I'm just going to strip it down and replace it with all of the parts from the new kit. As you can see, this is the ball that should be on there. So yeah, so obviously the gear linkage, if it went back in like this, it's just not fit for purpose and you'd have a horrible sloppy gear change, whereas this should make it nice and tight. Now while this is out, these bushes as well need to be replaced. They're absolutely falling apart, so they were gonna fail. They're in the kit, so it'd be mad not to swap them over now. Same with this one, this bush, just another one falling apart, so a little bit more complex. Had to drill this one out to replace the bush, but again, drilled the rivets out, new bush in, new rivets in, and we're good to go. We've got a 9-inch servo here and a very crusty looking master cylinder. We're going to change the master cylinder, but obviously we just want to bolt up the servo. That's the most important thing. So with the servo in place, we've got the wiring loom running up behind this. We've got the servo in place. That's all bolted in. So we can change the master cylinder. We're going to get a new one ordered up. Finally, with all that done, it's now time to get the subframe in. So the old one's out. The new one's ready to go in. The back of the Mark III subframe, there's some extra mount points. I don't know if it's just because it's for a convertible, but basically it goes a bit further and there's 2 extra bolts to bolt it in. Now there's a chance this Mark II isn't going to have it. Now, if that's the case, we're just going to trim those bits off the back of the subframe. It's no big deal. It will match the back of the Mark II subframe. Down here we can see this is a Mark II subframe. That's where the anti-roll bar bushes, they bolt in there, and then it kind of ends. Whereas you can see on the back of the Mark III subframe, that's the anti-roll bars bolted in. And then you've got this extra tab on the back. Maybe it's for strengthening. Maybe they just decided to put some extra metal in to make a Mark III heavier. Who knows? But if there's no mount points on the Mark II body, we're going to have to cut them off. Otherwise, it's going to be an MOT fail. So if it will appear to an MOT tester that the subframe is not secured properly. And if that's the case, this car won't be passed fit for the road. Yeah, you guessed it. There's no holes in the bottom of a Mark II for this. Trimmed, treated and painted. It's ready to go back in. We try again. Now I know it doesn't look like we've achieved much, but honestly, we've made quite a lot of progress. Obviously, the aircon is all mocked up and ready to go in. We've got the refurbished lower arms in. We've got the subframe mounted in the car. The fuel lines are in it. It's kind of all ready for the next stage, which is getting that engine into the car and giving this Mark II a heart again. So look guys, I think we've achieved a lot in today's video. So smash that like button, give us a subscribe, and again, share this video with someone you know who loves Mark IIs. We're trying to do this on an absolute budget, and next video, we're really gonna start putting some more bits into it. So we're gonna sit down and look at how much we've spent so far and what we think this is gonna cost to finish this project. But the national meet is coming up only in a couple of weeks, and really, this car needs to be there. So looking at it, do you think this car's gonna make it? Well, we've got 2 weeks to get this done. Now, if the next video's up, it's gonna be here. If not, there's gonna be something else cool for you to take a look at, and I'll see you on the next one.